Welcome back to A Conversation with Carl. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe for the latest content. Today, I am very excited to have Beth Karas join me. She is the former ADA, a former colleague of mine, a very close friend, one of the best legal analysts out there. Yes, you are. And she's also the host of A Curious Case Of, which is on HBO Max, and it must watch, but you have to listen to this first and then watch that. Welcome, Beth Karas, to the conversation.
Thank you, Carl. And thank you for that very nice introduction. I don't know that I'm not the best analyst. I will tell people all I know is crime. Don't ask me to do legal commentary on a bankruptcy or on a marital custody dispute. I have to research it like anyone. All I know is crime. Okay?
But you do really well at crime. You know it really well. Why is Scott Peterson back in the news?
This is a case that just doesn't go away, right?
Yes.
You know, when I started covering Scott Peterson, you were not even at Court TV yet, because you and I were going in the field on trials. You would produce when I would report, and this all predates you, all right? 2003 and 2004 is when Scott Peterson was unfolding in terms of arrest, pretrial hearings, and then trial. And you started in 2005, but we talk about that later. So it became this huge case. There was not even a camera in the courtroom, but people were fascinated because this is the guy who was charged with the ultimate crime, right? Murder. He was facing the death penalty, and his wife was about to give birth. I mean, her due date was somewhere between February 10th and February 17th. She disappears and is presumed dead on the 24th. I know the defense is now arguing that Scott didn't kill her. Someone else kidnapped her and kept her alive for some days or up to a week. Regardless, she had a viable child inside of her, right? About to be born, a little boy who would be in his 20s today. Lacey would be around 51 today if they lived. Okay, it was a huge case then. He gets convicted, second degree of the baby, first degree of the wife, but he gets the death penalty. And the case went on forever for an appeal. But I mean, as you can imagine, it was a 6-month trial, approximately 6 months. They started picking a jury in March, but opening statements were June 1st, 2004. And the death verdict was like mid-December. I remember going back to the East Coast mid-December. So it was the better part of 2004. So it took a long time to transcribe the case and then all the issues on appeal. It went up to the California Supreme Court. That's a direct appeal when somebody gets the death penalty. And he had a very big win some years ago in the California Supreme Court. So it was in the news because his death verdict was overturned because of a problem in jury selection. And that was the right decision. And so the state had to decide whether or not to retry him on just the penalty phase. The guilt stood. And they decided just give him a life without parole sentence. So he's in general population now. He's not in San Quentin and on death row anymore. And that, too, was, I think, the right decision. I'm sure the DA consulted with the family, Lacey's family, because no one's been executed in California since 2006. I was on the grounds of San Quentin, I think, with the last execution, Tookie Williams. Maybe there was one more after that, but that was 2006. They basically put a stop to executions, even though the death penalty is still on the books and people are still being sentenced to death. Okay, so he was going to do a life sentence anyway, so that's very expensive to house somebody on death row. So now he's in general population, and he still is at it. He's at it, trying to prove his innocence now. He did have that big win, saving his life. Now the LA Innocence Project got involved, a new Innocence Project, not involved with the Innocence Network around the country, not part of the New York Innocence Project, which is sort of the focal point, the headquarters for the Innocence Network. They issued a statement. As soon as the LAIP took the case, they issued a statement saying they're not affiliated with them. Okay, so it's a...
But most of them aren't affiliated with each other.
No, I mean, the others are, yeah, because I think that I don't know if there's funding or cases or consultation. I'm not sure,
Okay.
But the the New York office, the
Made it
headquarters.
clear.
I remember reading it. It was like a little banner on their homepage saying, we are not a part of the LAIP. Okay,
Okay.
whatever. So it's a fairly new Innocence Project. It's not the California Innocence Project. It's the LA Innocence Project. And so I think they've had one exoneration. And so this was a big case for them to take. So Scott Peterson's back in the news. People don't understand that. I think a lot of people just thought, oh, it's the Innocence Project. California Innocence Project had been very robust and successful with some exoneration. So this was a big case, big name for them to take. And I do believe everyone working on it, they're true believers. But Scott also has a family or some family members who are very much behind this and helping to keep it alive. There was an A&E series some years ago that, sort of focused on his innocence, that it wasn't a fair trial. I think that was before the death verdict was overturned. And now there's yet another A&E series. So I think the family has also been pushing a narrative. So it's in the news again because he tried through the LA Innocence Project to get a new trial. And as I think they must have been producing the document. Of course they were. The decision came down just recently. And he lost on every single point. So they had to incorporate that in the last hour or so of their last segments of the 4-hour series to, deal with the fact that, he lost. All these things that they argue in the 4-hour, it's 2 nights. It was 2 nights on A&E, 4 hours, 2 hours each. They raised a lot of issues, stress testing the evidence, and they lost. He lost on all of it. So,
can we talk about the burglary across the street? When I hear people talk about the case, they talk about the burglary.
So it's really important in Scott's narrative, because I call it revisionist history, but in Scott's narrative to believe that the burglary of a house across the street from Scott and Lacey's they live on a street called Covina. These people were away for the holiday because she disappears December 24th. This burglary happens sometime between the 24th and 26th of December because that's when the family returns, right?
Yes.
They left at 10:33 in the morning on the 24th and they returned around 4:30, I think, on the 26th. So the burglary happens sometime in there. Now, Lacey is reported missed by her husband late afternoon on the 24th. He says he came home from fishing and found their dog that she sometimes would walk with a leash attached in the backyard. And there's no Lacey anywhere. And it's like 5 o'clock, 5:15 when he calls, 5:17 when he calls his in-laws to say, I can't find Lacey. So when did the burglary happen, right? In order to believe this whole narrative that the defense is putting out there, or the petitioner, he's a petitioner at this point, you have to believe the burglary happened that morning of the 24th. Well, the burglars got caught. The stuff they stole was recovered. Almost all of it was recovered. It was a safe from the house, tools from their shed, jewelry. I'm not sure all the jewelry was recovered, but a lot of stuff was recovered. And the burglar, there was a guy named Stephen Todd, and his buddy, Glenn Pierce, returned to get the safe in a car because Stephen Todd was on a bicycle. And he said it was Christmas Day, the night of Christmas Day. He's kind of down and out. And he had a son, and he bought his son a pair of shoes for Christmas, and he felt like his son wanted more. He wasn't that happy with shoes. And so he saw this house. He thought he saw mail sticking out of the mailbox. He thought, he's like a low-level criminal, right? And so he parks his bicycle, and it's dark out. It's like 3 a.m, so it's really the 26th. And he hops a fence, and he sees the shed is open, and he rummages around. He gets some tools. He makes noise to make sure nobody's home and waking them up. Then he kicks open the back door, and there's a boot print on the back door when the family comes home and finds their door, the house rummaged through. And then he finds all the other things in the house, and the safe is 250 pounds. He rolls it out, and he found a dolly in the backyard near the shed. He took the dolly, and he put the dolly in the safe in the front yard behind some bushes, pedaled his bicycle home, woke up his friend and said, come with your car. It was his mother's car. And they went and they got the safe. There were media trucks on the street. Stephen Todd says, yeah, there was a truck down the street. Now, this is wee morning hours, but it was down the street. And when he came back with the car, he said, there were reporters out there, but they were there for like a couple minutes. They just pulled up. Probably nobody thought this was a burglary happening. He said, I don't think the reporters were even looking our way because they're facing the Peterson house.
The house, yeah.
And the cops arrived to execute a search warrant, later that day. It's manna from heaven is what I call it for the defense, because a burglary happening, in those days when nobody's home and Lacey goes missing. really is convenient for them to argue she was kidnapped, and that's what they did.
So why does this case resonate? Why are people fascinated?
So, good-looking couple. She's a good-looking woman. He was a good-looking guy. They were like the couple next door. They were about to have their first baby. They were both in their 20s, or maybe he was close to 30. She was like 27, I think. She loved to cook, just very wholesome couple. And I mean, I think that some people could relate and wonder, geez, Scott Peterson could be my husband. Never
Yeah.
for the grace of God go I. Am I married to a Scott Peterson? Mark Garagos actually said that he was Scott's attorney, one of his defense attorneys at the trial. He said in the A&E series that Scott had no history of violence. He wouldn't do this. I mean, I just shook my head. You know how many cases there are of men killing women without having a history of domestic violence? Okay? First of all, we don't know everything that happened in their relationship. Only the two of them know whether he was psychologically abusive. I don't know. But there was a lot of evidence of premeditation. And obviously, I mean, every argument they made they've lost on not just this most recent appeal. These arguments went to the California Supreme Court, and a lot of them that they made in the most recent, filing and decision were made before the jury.
Yeah. He goes very far to the San Francisco Bay, dispose of her body. And he could have gone anywhere closer, but he goes very far. It's rainy day. It's Christmas Eve. All of that seems very strange to me to go fishing in San Francisco that day.
Yes. He had just bought a boat. You see, he was having a torrid new affair with a woman named Amber Fry. And Amber's friend who had introduced Amber to Scott, she had met Scott at a conference out of town and believed Scott was single and lived in Sacramento, because that's what Scott said. That was in November, of the same year, 2002. She introduced Sean Sidley. She introduced the two of them, Amber Fry and Scott. They got hot and heavy very quickly. And then the friend learned that Scott was really married, and she confronted Scott on December 6th. And she said, I'm telling Amber, and he begged her not to. He said, I will tell her. Let me tell her that I'm married. Or he at first denied even to the friend that he was married, and then he admitted it. He said, but I just lost her, something like that. So 3 days later, that was the deadline. You better tell Amber in 3 days or I am. He buys a boat that nobody knows about. He started looking at currents in the San Francisco Bay the day before and also that day. Buys a boat with cash. Then he tells Amber, well, this would be my first Christmas without my wife. I lost her. So he's actually telling her he doesn't have a wife when he still does, but he didn't by Christmas. And, that was sort of a big part of his premeditation. So he buys a boat. Now, when she goes missing and everybody starts looking for her around the house in the park, by the way, they went in the neighbor's backyard and the door wasn't kicked in that night. Okay. They say that he tells two neighbors first, like right after reporting her missing to the in-laws. He goes to two neighbors and he says, I was golfing all day. Have you seen Lacey? I haven't been able to reach her. But within a few hours and it's getting dark, people are in the park. A police officer asked him, what were you doing today? He said, well, I was going to go golfing, but it was too cold. So I made a last minute decision to go fishing. And I wanted to test out my new boat. Now, what were you fishing for? And he didn't have an answer for that. He later said sturgeon. But then when they looked at the boat, he had freshwater tackle. He didn't have saltwater tackle. He had bought a 2-day fishing license 4 days earlier, and he marked December 23rd, 24th on the fishing license. He had bought it on the 20th. And nobody knew about this boat. The defense claims that Lacey knew about it, but there's no evidence and she's gone. So it looks like, that too was part of his premeditation, but there were at least 11 bodies of water, freshwater bodies of water between Modesto, where they lived, and 60 miles away. Between 9 and 60 miles away, there were at least 11 bodies of water where he could have tested the boat if he just wanted to see how it floated. He didn't have to go to the saltwater, choppy, San Francisco Bay, 90 miles away when it's drizzling rain. And I read it was illegal to troll for sturgeon at that time of year, but that's what I read. I don't know. He didn't know. He wasn't as smart as he thought.
What did you think was going to happen? She was going to disappear. He was going to dispose of the body and nobody was going to not even find her, but did you think all these things were never going to come out?
I think, what happened was that when the police started searching in the bay, boats, divers, radar equipment, whatever, Scott he was changing his vehicles, and they were putting GPS tracking devices, the police were, but he was switching out vehicles a lot. So I think they were also tailing him. But anyway, they would follow him speeding to the bay. He would stay there like a few minutes, look at where they were searching, and then he would leave. Never talk to the detectives, any of the investigators, never ask them how are things going. Do you think you can find my wife? What's going on? He would just see where they were searching. And so that was weird, like, why? Why not? And I don't know. I think he thought by researching the currents, if he went to a certain place within the bay, she wouldn't stay within the bay. But, when she and the baby washed ashore, there had been a big storm. The waters were churning. It's believed she was anchored. Her 4 limbs were anchored by homemade anchors he made. That is the argument, because there was one homemade anchor in his warehouse, but there was a big cement bag he had bought, and there was a lot of dust in round circles consistent with the shape of the homemade anchor on this flatbed. So it looked like he had made more than the one anchor that was there with a 60-pound bag of cement. Anyway, she broke free, if you believe the prosecution's theory, and the jury did. She broke free, and her limbs separated consistent with, decomposition, and she's separated at the elbows, I think at one knee, and then one foot was missing. I mean, I saw the torso. Anyway, she washed ashore on the rocks, and Connor, the baby, washed ashore a quarter of a mile away. They were a day apart, and I saw the picture of him. He was completely intact. She was a torso completely decomposed, but he was intact because the uterus is a very strong, muscle, and she kept that baby protected that whole time she was underwater.
Yeah. The other thing people say about this case is that the jury found him guilty on circumstantial evidence, not on direct evidence. Yeah. Do you explain the difference?
Often, Carl, when I do analysis, that jurors across the country convict men and women on circumstantial evidence only all the time in murder cases, because direct evidence is just what it sounds like. It is a confession from the mouth of the bad person. It is an eyewitness, or it's a videotape of the crime. Those are the common examples of direct evidence. Murders, for the most part, don't happen in front of witnesses, or you hope they don't. And murderers don't confess. And usually it's not caught on videotape, although, there are a lot of videos around now. Luigi Mangione was caught on videotape because of the street cameras. So, I think that there probably are more crimes caught on camera now. So this was a circumstantial evidence case, and one piece of evidence might have an innocent explanation. Maybe another one standing alone would have an innocent explanation. Having an affair doesn't mean you're a murderer. That's absolutely true. But then you say he told her on December 9th, the deadline to tell her he was actually married, that he had been married. It'll be his first Christmas without his wife. He buys a boat that nobody knows about. He searches for, currents in the San Francisco Bay. I mean, all these things started stacking up. The lead detective took the stand and listed his 41 reasons why he believed Scott was a person. And I don't know if you were going to ask me this, but I'll add it anyway. In a homicide investigation, you start with the people closest to the victim. And when it's a woman like Lacey, you start with the husband. You rule them out, and you just kind of keep moving out.
Well, you have the circle. They always talk about the circle.
You move out, and then you move outwards. Other family members or co-workers who might have a beef with her. She was a substitute teacher, and she took yoga classes. Who might was somebody stalking her? So they could never rule out Scott. They looked at other places. They looked at so many tips that came in. There were so many sightings of Lacey after Scott went fishing. He went fishing at 10:08 in the morning. People claim they saw her after that. Those people didn't know her before. They knew her from a flyer of a pregnant woman. And Scott said she was wearing black pants and black leggings and a white top. When she washed ashore, she was wearing she had the waistband of the remnants of the tan capri maternity pants she had been wearing the night before when the two of them went to Lacey's sister's hair salon. Scott got a haircut, and the top she'd been wearing at the salon was found on top of her, in her hamper, on top of the dirty clothes. I think she was changing when she got home. Last time she spoke to anyone outside of Scott was at 8:30 at night when she spoke to her mother from the home phone. I think that he killed her before she finished undressing. I mean, one of the detectives, John Bueller, thinks maybe she was killed getting dressed in the morning the next day. I don't know. But Carl,
Wasn't the house all like, wasn't there like bleach all over the floor in the kitchen or something? I kind of remember that, but I could be wrong.
There was an odor of some bleach. And like he said, Lacey had been mopping in the morning when he left. She was so pregnant. And she had the housekeeper mop the floor the day before. So why is she mopping the next day? But that's what he said she was doing. And he did, when he came home from fishing, he got home around 4:30, 4:45, and they were supposed to be at the in-laws at 6. And he took all his clothes off and put them in the washing machine. There were some wet rags on the washing machine which were taken out. He put his clothes in there, and then he called the in-laws. I mean, anyway, his timeline is so weird. But I do recall there being an odor of bleach, and there were 2 mops outside, so he may have mopped also. There was no evidence of blood. It is not believed that he stabbed her or shot her. It is believed it was a soft kill, which is like a smothering or a strangulation. And you're going to expect to find her hair, her fingerprints, her
all over the house.
DNA skin cells around her house. It's her house.
Yeah. It just seems so strange to me that he thought he was going to get away with this.
But men do. But they do. You know, I've said this before to others in other interviews. There's a book over there. I should have grabbed it. I don't want to get out of my seat. But I sat with a writer in court. Her name is Marilee Strong. She was finishing a book called Erased.
Yeah.
Erased. Past tense. Missing Women, Murdered Wives. And she profiles 50 or more cases throughout history of men who killed their girlfriends or wives and either staged it to look like an accident or suicide, or they completely erased and disappeared their bodies and then erased them from their lives. And they're sociopaths. She created a profile, like a psychological profile, which is not recognized in the DSM. But Marilee told me she did talk to some psychologists who thought she was on to something, you know, like this is really like a thing. They're like sociopaths, and they're like, and I talked about like a case not that long ago, like when we've been covering cases, Carl, in Atlanta, a guy named Barton Corbin, a dentist, no criminal history. He's a dentist who shot his girlfriend, another dental student, in dental school, but staged it to look like a suicide. And that's what it was ruled. 14 years later, he shoots and kills his wife. And now he's caught. They're like, okay, wait a second. You know, and then they exhume the other, you know, the first one. And now he's in prison for the 2 murders. That was in Atlanta. So, I mean, these guys are out there. Don't kid yourself.
I just don't get why people think they're getting away with it. But what do I know?
I think crime pays. And I remember Sharon Roach, Lacey's mother, at the penalty phase. She's on the witness stand, and she just like turned to Scott at one point and said, divorce was an option. You didn't have to kill her, or something like that. I may be paraphrasing it, but she's like, why didn't you divorce her?
Let's change topics a little bit. What trials do you see coming up that you think we should be paying attention to?
So, I mean, there's a case that's just starting right now in Plymouth, Massachusetts. A woman whose last name is Clancy. She's accused of killing her 3 children, and then she jumped out of the window and tried to kill herself. And she lived to be tried, but she's paralyzed. She's in a wheelchair because of the fall. And she was a nurse, and apparently a very good one. But she was on all kinds of meds. I don't know, postpartum depression and more. I heard she was on like 15 different medications, and I think her defense is going to be that it made her homicidal and suicidal. I don't know if the jury's going to buy it, but that case is happening right now. Like openings, if they're not today, they may be tomorrow. So as we're talking, it is July 23rd, right? So, that's what's unfolding right now in Massachusetts. I'm also looking at like the fallout in the Karen Reed case. That case just doesn't seem to go away. That story keeps on giving, and there's civil suit that's been filed in that case. But that's what I'm looking at.
And in New York here, we have Luigi Mangione coming up.
Of course, Luigi. Luigi Mangione in our backyard, Carl, is going to trial after Labor Day, early September. And a friend of mine is trying the case. And so I asked him to lunch. Like anytime this summer, he's like, only weekends. I'm too busy. Okay.
But that to me doesn't seem like a very hard case to prove, because you've already got a confession. You see him on camera committing the crime? What are the issues that could be
Look, it
facing the
does seem
prosecution?
like a rock solid case, as we would say in the DA's office. He did confess. It's caught on video. The ghost gun or whatever the gun was he had. I think it was a homemade 3D made silencer, maybe. So the judge suppressed some of the evidence, and I'm not on top of all the details on that the way I know the Scott Peterson case, but the judge suppressed some of the evidence, which I think was a little unfair, at least the way he did it, because it was evidence that the Altoona, Pennsylvania police seized when they confronted him at a McDonald's or whatever the restaurant was. And he gave them a fake ID and was a little nervous, and they looked in his backpack, right? So it's not fatal to the case because the judge is letting in the notebook with his musings and admissions, confession, whatever, and that's coming in, and the gun comes in. But the judge said that it's suppressed because, it didn't follow, New York law, strict search and seizure laws, but it did in Pennsylvania. So the Pennsylvania cops did not do anything wrong. Okay. It didn't rise to the standard in New York. And he should have just said that. I mean, that's what I personally think. He should have said, well, look, it was a good search for Pennsylvania, but we can only accept the items found incident to arrest, I think, as opposed to what led to the probable cause of, whatever items led to the probable cause. Once you're under arrest, the search incident to arrest, that's a different standard. So that's my understanding. So, I mean, okay, he doesn't have all the evidence to work with, but he's got great evidence. You know what he's got? He's got a slice of the community, a slice of the jury pool that thinks Luigi Mangione is a hero because they're very upset with the insurance industry. And it's very warped, thinking, I think, right? Because you don't kill a CEO in cold blood on the street because you're upset with the insurance company. You have to deal with it in other avenues. He's sending a message. Well, that message is going to send him to prison for the rest of his life. But I think the defense is hoping that jurors may compromise on something less than first-degree murder or second-degree murder, something less. I don't know what lessers will go to the jury, though.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the case of Jessica Lunsford of the Cooey case in Florida, where I was talking to the detective. They got a confession from him. He tells them where Jessica is, but he keeps asking for an attorney. And I was talking to the detective after the judge keeps that part of the confession out. And I said to the detective at the time when I was in Florida for the case, why he said, we knew he had her. We knew he had her somewhere, and we had to get to her because we knew time was running out. So we didn't care that we were going to break
his constitutional right,
Yeah.
And they were going to continue questioning him.
Yes.
I remember that because I was with you, right? So, the Cooey case. Okay, so let's just a little background. Yeah. Carl and I are in Miami. John Cooey was a change of venue from the northern west coast of Florida up by the Panhandle down to Miami. And because it took so long to get a jury, because it was a death penalty case, we were going up to West Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale, two different courts, the trial court and the appellate court, for Ann and Nicole Smith, because she had just died and her body was like in a locker in like Broward County, just north of Miami. So we're covering that. But you and I almost went to Wisconsin instead of Cooey because Court TV was deciding between Stephen Avery's trial and John Cooey's trial. And they decided Stephen Avery was going to take too long. It probably took the same amount of time since it took like 3 weeks to get a jury in John Cooey. In any event, I don't think there ever would have been a Making a Murderer series if you and I had gone to Wisconsin, because we would have aired the whole thing. People would have seen some of the evidence that series on Netflix kept out. Okay, but I digress. The cops, it was the exigency of the situation. They had a 7-year-old girl who was missing and might still be alive somewhere. They were going to talk to him. The heck with the Constitution. And frankly, I see their point, right? They needed to find that little girl.
Because he kept asking, I think it was like 3 or 4 times he asks to speak to a lawyer.
Several times, yes.
Yeah, and and they say, we're going to get it. But when I talked to the detective, he said, we knew he had her. We knew he.
Yes, they were weighing saving her life with maybe never even being able to bring a case against Cooey, right? Yeah. I mean, think about it. He was he was a registered sex offender who was in that neighborhood, but he had it registered in that neighborhood. And he went into the trailer, the mobile home of Jessica Lunsford's father was living with his mother. So the grandma, I believe I think that there was another relative there. Anyway, he stole her from her bed. He buried her in double black garbage bags after sexually abusing her. He buried her alive. That is the one story where I left the courtroom in tears after a private viewing of the photos for the media. I like, there's only so much I could take, when you.
When I was in my hotel room, I had nightmares that I would think, like, I just remember waking up one morning in the middle of the night thinking that he's in the room here with me. So,
see? Yes, you too, right?
Yes.
I mean, we do get a little bit of PTSD or a little bit of trauma vicarious trauma from covering these cases.
Yes. Beth Karas, thank you so much for joining me today. The show is A Curious Case of on HBO Max. You should definitely check it out. It's must-see TV after you listen to this, of course. And let me know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments section. Until next time, everyone, be safe.